Today we gather to consider the first part of the Wisdom of the Ages series. It is a series of 9 talks over 3 Saturdays. The topics for today are the Thread Doctrine with Jerry, the Tao Te Ching with Kathy, and the Golden Verses by Judy. The consideration of these endearing ideas and the forces they embody should not be underestimated. The effort is the torch that lights the way on humanity's pilgrimage. As we make these ideas our own and weave them into our daily lives, we all create a light for those we share time with. So we begin with Jerry and the Thread Doctrine.
Thank you very much, Laura. Happy spring, everyone. Thank you so much for taking part and joining us today and bringing your spirit and your thoughts and feelings to our occasion. I have some prepared remarks to share with you, and it concerns this concept of the Thread Doctrine. One of the essential principles of esoteric philosophy is continuity. According to the Gupta Vidya, the secret wisdom, there is continuity between the science of spirituality, the philosophy of perfectibility, and the religion of solidarity. There is continuity between the metaphysical and the physical. And there is continuity between divinity, nature, and man. In a cosmos of radical unity, everything is connected by a golden thread. There is a mysterious continuity between lifetimes, which is called the Sutratman, the thread soul. This metaphor of a thread describes the evolution of man as a thread upon which many beads are strung, representing individual lifetimes. The consciousness within, the higher man, is the thread. This spirit stands outside of space and time. It is the witness, the perceiver, and thinker that stands on high, spectator but not participant, thinker but not actor. Krishna famously said about the thread soul, or the spirit in man, "The weapon divideth it not, the fire burneth it not, the water corrupteth it not, and the wind drieth it not away. For it is indivisible, inconsumable, incorruptible, and is not to be dried away. It is eternal, universal, and permanent. It is invisible, immovable, and inconceivable, and unalterable. Therefore, knowing it to be thus, thou shouldest not grieve." Our essential nature is sevenfold, and therefore both transcendent and immanent, making it both mysterious and obvious at the same time. It is paradoxical at root as a consequence. Similarly, the teachings of the Gupta Vidya, the Sanatana Dharma, the Tao Te Ching, the perennial philosophy, or Theosophy, it goes by many names, is correspondingly transcendent and immanent. It is both mysterious and commonsensical, deeply complex and remarkably simple. Lao Tzu, who we will hear from momentarily, was keen to point out this amusing conundrum. The great Tao flows everywhere, to the left and to the right. The 10,000 things rely upon it, and it never turns away from them. It does its work quietly and claims no credit. It clothes and feeds the 10,000 things. It does not claim to be their Lord. Ever desireless, it may be called the small. The 10,000 things return to it. Yet it does not claim to be their Lord. It may be called the great. Because it makes no effort to be great, it is therefore extremely great. H.P. Blavatsky chose to call it the secret doctrine and wrote a book by the same name. The idea is that there is an underlying parent teaching, a thread doctrine of sorts, that underlies all authentic spiritual traditions, all mystical communications, and therefore all sacred texts of mankind. Therefore, Krishna, Buddha, Shankara, Pythagoras, Plato, Moses, Jesus, Muhammad, the Bhagavad Gita, the Diamond Sutra, the Crest Jewel of Wisdom, the Golden Verses, the Bible, the Quran, etc., are all there to provide unique expressions of the same hidden thread doctrine, the same esoteric parent teaching. This transmission of esoteric teachings is spoken of by Krishna at the beginning of the 4th chapter with the Bhagavad Gita. He says, "This exhaustless doctrine of yoga I formally taught unto Vishvavat. Vishvavat communicated it to Manu, and Manu made it known to Ishvaku. In being thus transmitted from one unto another, it was studied by the Rajarishis, until at length, in the course of time, the mighty art was lost, O harasser of thy foes. It is even the same exhaustless, secret, eternal doctrine I have this day communicated unto thee, because thou art my devotee and my friend." HPB echoed these same sentiments in her summary of the first book of the Secret Doctrine, when she said, "The secret doctrine is the accumulated wisdom of the ages. The flashing gaze of seers has penetrated into the very kernel of matter and recorded the soul of things there. It is the uninterrupted record covering thousands of generations of seers, whose respective experiences were made to test and to verify the traditions passed orally by one early race to another of the teachings of higher and more exalted beings who watched over the childhood of humanity. There is an esoteric unity to all authentic sacred texts, and we are invited to prove or disprove this hypothesis for ourselves. The teachers of the modern Theosophical movement, celebrating our 150th year, I might add, tell us that there is an invisible thread tying together all authentic spiritual texts into a sublime tapestry. This bold claim, which HPB makes in the Secret Doctrine, tells us that we can, with sufficient effort, discover a common metaphysics, a consistent ethical code, a coherent symbology in all sacred texts. One needs to learn the keys. One needs to peer past the challenges of human translations, sponsored by encrusted religious institutions that profit and support the false notion that they are in sole possession of the truth. One needs to read between the lines, expand the concepts, and detect the spirit of the text. Sifting through the distortions, crude translations, misconceptions, misinterpretations, dogmatic interests, pseudo-mystics, and pseudo-philosophers making self-interested claims and seeking to profit from what has always been freely given, like sunlight, is a difficult process. The Theosophical movement was instantiated to provide assistance in this noble enterprise. For example, take note of the widely different translations of the modern Bible, often dumbed down for mass consumption. Then read the pristine and largely untarnished Gnostic text, the Gospel according to Thomas. The difference is astonishing. The first reads like a children's storybook, and the other more like the Tao Te Ching, full of paradox and symbolism. We must sift through the woodpile of parochialism, dogmatism, and literalism to uncover the deeper meanings. What makes a sacred text sacred? It is sacred because it has the capacity to electrify the mind and inspire the heart of the student. It is sacred because it is a gift given lovingly by the great and peaceful ones to mankind. It is sacred because it is a representation of a more deeply hidden teaching which defies formulation and is unsullied by misinterpretation. It is sacred because, in a sense, it is Buddhi whispering to Manas, the master to the disciple. And it is sacred because it is beautiful, musical, artistic, and poetic. If a sacred text is to be made an elevator of consciousness, it must be embraced in the right spirit. Because of its musical power, it has the capacity to take us out of our separative sense of self. It is also prodding, provoking, and paradoxical intentionally for this very purpose. The sole claim of the Buddha was, "I am awake," which means that the rest of us, in comparison, are in varying degrees of sleep, meaning passivity, or distraction, meaning hyperactivity. Sacred texts are designed to shake us out of our somnambulistic existence, sleepy. The prison of separative existence is a confinement of our own making, we are told. The voice of the silence uses the image of a bird imprisoned in a cage. The word ignorance here stands for a condition of consciousness trapped in name and form. So the voice reads, "Yea, ignorance is like unto a closed and airless vessel, the soul a bird shut up within. It warbles not, nor can it stir a feather, but the songster mute and torpid sits, and of exhaustion dies." Like the waves of the ocean, slowly reducing the rocks upon the shore to sand, a sacred text can erode our false sense of self, which is so suffocating to an inner universal spirit yearning to be free. Sacred texts are classical in the sense that they are contemporary in every era. They are expressed in a place and in a time, but are relevant to all places and all times. You might say that Plato, for example, emphasizes wisdom, or that the Buddha emphasizes compassion, or Jesus, love. But could it be that these are three different ways of looking at the same hidden spirit in man from different points of view? We have to rise up to a sacred text. We endeavor to discover the universality behind and within the teaching. It has a spirit, if you will, a spirit that cannot be tied down, confined, limited to an ism. It is much like a flame in dynamic motion. This requires intuition, and intuition is earned in at least three ways: by right living, by profound questions, and by meditation. Within sacred texts are talismanic expressions, which are like road signs pointing the way through the wilderness. We might collect them into a necklace of inspiration in the course of a lifetime. Ones like, "Resolve thou to become a man of meditation," says the Gita. "Look inward, thou art Buddha," says the voice. "All that we are is a result of what we have thought," came from the Buddha in the Dhammapada. "Yield and remain whole," says Lao Tzu in the Tao Te Ching. "Above all, respect thyself," comes from Pythagoras. "The unexamined life is not worth living," says Socrates in Plato's dialogues. As a man thinketh, so shall he be, comes from the Proverbs of the Bible. The soul is the perceiver, is assuredly vision itself, pure and simple, unmodified, and looks directly upon ideas, comes from Patanjali's. And the Upanishads pronounces, thou art that. These are just a few of the talismans one might find in sacred texts. These mantras are like cathedral bells, summoning the student to become awake to the hidden spirit within oneself and all of life. The profundity and power of these affirmations defies description, but perhaps one of the finest explanations comes from the hymn Devak, itself filled with mantras, when it says, their inmost essence, pristine and pure, hidden deep within, was brought to light through love. These seed thoughts speak directly to the heart. They are chords of the music of the soul. They are eternally fresh and perpetually relevant to the life of a human being. A student could memorize the entire Bible or recall every word attributed to the Buddha and not come remotely close to the benefit of taking a single seminal phrase from a sacred text and making it their own and keeping it alive in their mind and heart throughout a lifetime. How we approach a sacred text and what attitude we bring to the teaching is of paramount importance. We know how much preparation athletes and musicians go through to enable them to compete and perform at the highest levels. Why should it be any different for something as important as receiving the teachings of a sacred text? In the Indian tradition, people prepare themselves for receiving the teachings of the Gita, for example, by intoning various songs and chants in the sublime language of the gods, Sanskrit. This is intended to evoke the reverence and respect necessary for receiving the maximum benefit of the teachings. Tibetan monks spend hours in meditation before hearing the teaching. It is intended to establish the right mental posture. Saying the rosary serves a similar function in the Christian tradition. All must find their own ways of evoking the most receptive stance. There is no formula, no technique, but perhaps what could be said is that the student should cultivate an open-minded attitude, a willingness to explore the meaning and veracity of any proposition prior to judgment. Kindly to judge, as Shakespeare would say. The student should adopt an impersonal approach, setting aside likes and dislikes, cultural limitations, and conventional biases. And we all know this is exceedingly difficult to do and very easy to say. We have to try. We want to take the teaching at face value. Let it stand on its own, without reference to tradition or authority figures. Does it or does it not speak to you? Like music, does it move you for reasons you cannot explain? If it does, embrace it, befriend it, adore it. If not, move on. There is gold sprinkled throughout every stream. It is not necessary to understand every word, like we were reading a textbook, but it is important to be on the lookout for jewels and gems within the text that can become companions for a lifetime. The tendency to measure an idea solely by how it corresponds with the scaffolding of conventional thinking is unhelpful. Tolstoy said, "Wrong does not cease to be wrong because the majority share in it." Spiritual exploration requires an ever-growing capacity for self-reliance. The quest for truth is a lonely road. It is far easier and more comfortable to follow the crowd. How do we avoid taking ourselves too seriously in this endeavor? How do we judge the tendency to be heavy and sanctimonious? After all, one of the central teachings in the Thread Doctrine is to reduce the separative self to a zero. So trying too hard to be or to appear spiritual or straining to impress others is essentially walking backwards. There should be a joy and a lila as part of the process, we are told. Sure, the road is uphill, but isn't it making our legs stronger? And like learning to sing or dance, it is perfectly fine to stumble and bumble along while we are learning. And in the balance, laugh at ourselves, much like a baby giggles and smiles while learning how to walk. Thoreau said that what people call reading is not real reading. Real reading, he said, is entering into the mind of the writer. There's a great lesson in this. Once a sacred text has won our trust, once we resonate with it, then the secret is to imagine and attune ourselves to the heart of the writer. Blend thy heart and soul, says the teacher. The great challenge in self-transformation, of course, is the mind. The mind is the key, both the bridge and the barrier to progress. Sacred texts allow us to enter into the mind and spirit of great souls, Mahatmas, Bodhisattvas. The student of the science of spirituality could be characterized as one who selects a single idea from a sacred text or the book of nature or inspiration from within, and planting it in the soul of the mind and watering it with loving attention. And with keen discrimination, the student clears away the weeds of selfish desire and false self-importance and finds roots expand from silent contemplation. A stem of branches and leaves emerges into a sapling several feet high, reaching out to the sun. And with the protective care and eventually that sapling turns into a mighty tree, bearing fruit for all nearby and for generations to come. Ultimately, the thread doctrine, the golden thread, is the spiritual path itself. And sacred texts are an invitation to renew the journey, a companion on the yellow brick road, to the source of consciousness, the source of wisdom, and the source of life. We become part of the path ourselves to the degree to which we see our own obstacles and struggles in life as opportunities to assist others similarly burdened. It is our share of the journey, our responsibility to map out a course through the challenges of life that will be useful for others coming along the way after us. Through noble struggle, we gain something valuable to share and have the integrity to offer advice to others. An obvious example of this is the support women give each other in childbirth. And if we are anxious to pass on what we have learned, in a very small way, we become a little part of the Guru Parampara chain ourselves. We too have something to teach. And is this not another example of the continuity of the thread doctrine? We are born to help each other, and as a consequence, are given help ourselves to move along the path. There is a continuity between the student and the teacher, and the teacher's teacher. There's a continuity between the oversoul, the individual soul, and the persona. The obvious continuity is between the sacred text and the great soul from which the teaching was originally uttered. Upanishad in the Indian tradition literally means come sit close. As children, we move into the warm embrace of our parents in moments of sadness and joy. We lean into our mother reading us a storybook filled with pictures when we are very young. We lean closer to our father or mother when they whisper into our ears words of encouragement like, I believe in you. Little did we know how archetypal this was. The entire spiritual path is a moving closer to the teaching, moving closer to the teacher, moving closer to the self within. Because Krishna tells us the Atman is the Guru par excellence. When we read a sacred text in the right spirit, we can feel the presence of the teacher. We move into the orbit of the teacher, the brotherhood of bodhisattvas, the sisterhood of sages. The teachers of the Gupta Vidya are not historical figures long gone, but rather spiritual presences detected by the devotional heart, we are taught. Gandhi called the Bhagavad Gita his guru. He turned to it in all his hours of need and crisis. It taught him all he needed to know about satya and ahimsa, truth and nonviolence. He made it his companion, and hence it was far more than a book to him. It was a living presence, a connection to what he called his inner voice. When we read the Sermon on the Mount, is it not possible to feel the umbrella of loving kindness of Christ? When we embrace the Dhammapada, is it not possible to feel the calm compassion of the Buddha? Krishna, Jesus, Buddha are great souls, and they must be every bit as much alive today as they were when they walked the earth in past times thousands of years ago. The sacred texts of the Thread Doctrine are the bridges to their spirit. Thank you.
Thank you, Jerry, especially for showing us how we can take the Bodhisattva knowledge with us throughout our day into every corner of our life. So thank you very much. That was excellent.